Is there someone in your life who seems to treat you the same unpleasant way again and again? Perhaps before you even see them, you already know how the conversation will go. You expect the criticism, you prepare your defense, you remember what they said the last time, and inwardly you begin answering them before they have spoken a word. A friend of mine once did exactly this with a producer who constantly criticized and rejected her work. She wanted him to change, yet every morning on her way to work, she was already arguing with him in imagination, and that was the part she had not noticed. I asked her to change one very specific thing, the conversation she was having with him before the outer conversation ever began. What followed showed her that the relationship she kept meeting outside was closely connected to the relationship she had been rehearsing within. So let us see exactly what she changed, how she practiced it, and how you can use the same principle with someone in your own life. My friend was a costume designer at Radio City Music Hall in New York. One of the producers there seemed almost impossible to please. He criticized her designs, rejected work she believed was good, and she had come to expect another unpleasant encounter whenever she dealt with him. But when we spoke about the problem, something became very clear. The producer was not only criticizing her at work, she was carrying him with her long before she arrived. Each morning, on her way to the music hall, she would remember previous conversations and silently argue with him. She would hear his criticism, defend her work, answer him back, and prepare herself for what she expected him to say next. In other words, the argument had already begun before she entered the building. So I asked her to stop rehearsing the relationship she said she wanted changed. Instead, during that same journey to work, she was to hear him speaking to her differently. She was to hear him praise her designs and express his approval, while she responded naturally with gratitude. Nothing complicated was required. The same man, the same journey, but a different conversation within. And that change gave her a very practical way to test whether the conversations we repeatedly accept in imagination have anything to do with the relationships we continue to meet outside. She followed the instruction morning after morning. As she walked toward the theater, she no longer used that time to prepare for criticism. She heard the producer congratulating her on her designs, and she answered him with gratitude for his praise and kindness. She was not trying to persuade him in imagination. She was not mentally arguing better than before. She was experiencing the kind of relationship she actually wanted with him. And in a very short while, his behavior changed completely. The man who had seemed rude, unfair, and almost impossible to please became, in her experience, the most pleasant professional employer she had encountered. The point is not that she discovered better arguments or finally convinced him of her value. She stopped rehearsing the version of him she no longer wanted to meet. The outer relationship then began to reflect the conversation she had been repeatedly accepting within. That is where this becomes useful in your own life. A difficult relationship is often rehearsed long before the next meeting ever takes place. So before trying to change the next conversation outside, first notice the one you are already having within. Think now of one person whose behavior repeatedly troubles you. Before your next meeting with them, do not begin by asking how you can make them act differently. First, listen to the conversation you are already having with them in imagination. By that I mean the private exchange that runs through your mind when you think of them, what you expect them to say, and what you hear yourself saying back. Perhaps your manager asks to see you in their office, and before you have even walked through the door, you are already expecting criticism. You begin explaining yourself, defending what you did, or preparing for another unpleasant exchange. That is the conversation to notice. Instead of continuing it, choose one brief exchange that would naturally belong to the relationship you wish to experience. Hear your manager say, "You handled this really well. I appreciate it." Then hear yourself answer naturally, "Thank you. I'm glad it worked out well." The same habit can appear outside the workplace. Perhaps there is a relative whose criticism you have come to expect. Before the next visit, you are already hearing the familiar remark and preparing the same defense. Here's something different. Perhaps, "I understand your decision. I am happy for you." Then allow yourself to receive those words without beginning the old argument again. You need not imagine the person becoming someone entirely different. You are choosing one simple conversation that implies a different relationship between you. Keep it brief enough to become familiar. And when the former argument begins again in your mind, do not fight with it. Recognize that you have returned to the old conversation and quietly return to the one you have chosen. You are not waiting for the next encounter to tell you what the relationship is. You are deciding which relationship you will continue to rehearse within. And once you have chosen that new conversation, leave it there. Do not turn the next encounter into a test. Before I leave you, there is one final thing to understand. After changing the conversation within, do not immediately begin watching the other person to see whether they have changed. If you meet them tomorrow and examine every word, expression, or tone of voice for proof that the practice is working, you have quietly returned to the old relationship. You are still asking the other person to tell you which version of the relationship is real. If you rehearse the desired conversation inwardly and then spend the next encounter searching for signs of the old one, your attention has returned to the very relationship you intended to leave behind. This is the important distinction. You are not using imagination to fight another person or force a new personality upon them. You are refusing to continue rehearsing the relationship you no longer wish to experience. So do not turn the next meeting into a test. Let your new inner conversation become the one that feels familiar. And whenever you catch yourself privately entering the old argument again, remember, stop practicing the relationship you say you want changed. Choose the conversation that belongs to the relationship you wish to live. Now, let us go into the silence